Okay, welcome everyone. My name is Dr. Erin McNeil, and I work at Keep Indiana Learning, which is part of CISC, Central Indiana Education Service Center. And I am a literacy specialist here. So I do a lot of professional development around literacy and multilingual learners. And so AI is just kind of something I've been playing with. So I'm by no means an AI expert. So as we kind of go through this together, we'll just do some trial and error today and seeing what works for me and what might work for you as well. There is a note catcher, so you may want to go ahead and get a link to the slides. So I'll pause here and let you, if you want to type in the link, the canva.link/read AI, it should give you access to the slides. And if you have any questions while you're trying to get started, you can drop them in the chat as well. And it may help if I drop this in the chat for you. Oh, thank you, Jenna, for adding the slides link. Okay, so our topic today is enhancing reading instruction with AI tools. And like I said a minute ago, I am from Keep Indiana Learning. If you're interested in any of our professional development opportunities, we have a newsletter that you could sign up for here. We also have a great conference on June 9th and 10th at Plainfield High School. It's a conference for educators by educators, so we would love for you to sign up and come join us. So our goal for today is to use AI tools to differentiate lessons, create vocabulary and fluency assignments, and to support comprehension. So that's a lot of things for a 1 hour webinar, but we will do our best to kind of get through those as we go today. And there's also a note catcher. So if you want to click this link here for the note catcher, and you can capture your notes and that as you kind of work through this. And why? Why is there a note catcher? Because writing and reading are related. So if we think about writing added to reading to increase understanding and improve memory, and research finds that when we're writing about what we have read, it's beneficial. So anytime we take some extra notes as we're reading or learning, it's beneficial. So as we're thinking about what we're doing with our students, we'll just try to remember, right, that anything you can get them to write down is important. So I'll stop just a second and make sure you can, if you can't get the note catcher, please let me know in the chat. Okay, so we're going to integrate AI into lessons that emphasize comprehension, fluency, morphology, and vocabulary. But let's start with talking about what is comprehension. So most of the time, I receive questions from teachers quite often about students not comprehending. And my question usually to them is, what exactly do you mean they're not comprehending? And the reason is because comprehension is not a skill. So comprehension is an outcome. So it's a condition that teachers help to create by providing background knowledge, teaching word skills, and teaching comprehension strategies. And it's also affected by the topic and the purpose along with what the reader brings. So to bring this to light a little bit, if we look at Scarborough's reading rope, any one of these pieces of the rope could cause us not to be comprehending correctly. So when I say comprehension is an output or an outcome, it is all of these things put together to create the condition of comprehension. So if our students are not comprehending, we have to figure out what is the problem. Is it the word recognition? Do they not know the words? If it's not the words, maybe they don't know the background knowledge to comprehend the text. Maybe they don't understand the text structures or the language structures and they're having trouble making sense of the sentence. Maybe they're not the verbal reasoning and the critical thinking, they're having some trouble with that. Or maybe even the literacy knowledge of putting all these things together. But all of these things come together to create skilled reading, which is comprehension. So when we're thinking about how we're going to teach a text, there is a roadmap to get to comprehension. So this is my favorite definition of comprehension because it follows the brain science of what we know about learning how to read. So Dr. Stanis Dehaun, you should look up his book if you're interested, or even his YouTube videos. Um, he is in charge of the Neuroscience Institute at the University of Paris. And he was the first person that put a child in an MRI machine and watched what happened when they learned how to read. And so, what he found is that we see every letter in a word. I know you sometimes see those memes on social media that say we don't actually see all the letters, we just see the first and the last, and that is false news, fake news there. We've actually known since 1959, some research by Dr. Huey, who said we see every letter, and that is true. Dr. Stanis Dehaan's work showed that as well. And so it goes to a place in the back of our brain called the letter box. And from there, we take one of two paths. So if we know the word, if we have heard the word before and heard the sounds in a word, we have decoded it. So if we don't know the word, we go through and sound it out and decode it. So that is path one. If we do know the word, we've heard it said out loud before, we know the word parts, then we make connections between what we are reading and what we already know. So where we've heard the word before, what we know about the word, and it's amazing to me that we do this with every word we read. And then the third part, and this was something that my students had a lot of trouble with, was thinking deeply about what they read. And I don't know that my students had trouble with thinking deeply. I think it was more that they just wanted to be done and move on, right? They wanted to go to the next thing or do the next task, instead of really slowing down and considering all the pieces and parts of what they've read. So those are the three parts of reading. So we are decoding, we're making connections about what we know, and then we're thinking deeply to comprehend a text. Okay, so I'm going to pause here and ask you, after all of the things I've said in your note catcher, to just jot down a quick definition of comprehension. So, when we're thinking about how should we plan our lessons, when we're looking at planning reading lessons, any reading lessons, and we're thinking about Tier 1 lessons. So, this is a great example of a lesson plan in the article Evidence-Based Reading Instruction for Secondary Students. And in this lesson plan, you'll notice that they have a before reading strategy, a during reading strategy, and an after reading strategy. So when we're doing that before reading strategy, we're starting with words. So we're looking at what vocabulary do kids need to know in order to access this text. And then they're doing a comprehension strategy. So that comprehension strategy, that's what makes students slow down and think about the text and really focus in on what they're thinking deeply about. And then during reading, we're doing those comprehension strategies as we're reading through. And then after reading, we're doing some kind of like summarization. We're coming back to the comprehension strategy we've talked about. Sometimes you'll have kids write. So really, we're thinking about doing a before, during, and after reading. In the before reading, we're really having kids think about what comprehension strategy they will use, what vocabulary they will use. During reading, you'll see here they do have some fluency practice where the teacher is prompting and reading aloud and asking for student responses. And then we're doing an after reading where we're actually finishing that comprehension strategy by summarizing what we've done. So if we think about what should we teach in each tier, we teach vocabulary words, word reading. What does this mean? We're telling students how to say those words out loud, right? So in order to learn a word, we have to hear a word, right? To read it. That's why phonics works. That's why we sound out words because we read them out loud in our head, even when we're reading silently. So sounding out those vocabulary words, saying them out loud to your students. Doing some fluency practice of hard paragraphs or passages. And what I mean by that is we're rereading them. So as a reader, um, when you have an issue with a hard text, you usually use some strategies. And one of those strategies is rereading it until it makes sense. So that's what I mean by fluency practice is that we're rereading for understanding, not for speed. So we're rereading until we can understand what's happening. And as teachers, we're doing these things explicitly. We're telling kids how we're doing this. And we're using comprehension strategies to get them to slow down. And this is even in content areas. So in all areas, this is how we're teaching reading. Kylene Beers, she followed the same roadmap here in her book called When Kids Can't Read, What Teachers Can Do, and it came out in 2023. So as you see, there's a before reading. And in that, she does the word work where she's sounding out the words, vocabulary, and then she provides some background knowledge using one of these purpose guides, anticipation guides, or a KWLE chart. There's also the during reading strategies where you're metacognitive, you're asking kids to stop and think about what they're doing. Text structure here, the organization structures, fluency practice, asking them to reread, and then after reading. So what are we doing after reading? Summarizing, sequencing, questioning the text. Fisher and Fry just came out with a book in 2026 called Teaching Foundational Skills to Adolescent Readers. It follows that same roadmap. So we're using decoding skills to teach vocabulary words. We're doing some fluency building activities. We're using comprehension building practices and strategies. And then this is also a really important thing. We're making sure students are using challenging text. So grade level appropriate text. We're allowing them to try hard informational text, challenging text, seeing the text that they're using. And finally, this great IES practice guide, same thing. So we're doing decoding skills, fluency building, using comprehension strategies, and then asking them to make sense of those challenging texts. So this roadmap is really evident across all of the research when we're thinking about what are we going to do to teach reading. So in your note catcher, reflect on what you're currently doing or what you could maybe add that follows that science of reading research. So I'll just pause and let you add that. You can also add it in the chat if you would rather write that in the chat. We can also do that there.
Erin, it looks like you need to approve access for everyone.
I'm sorry.
No, for the note catcher.
Okay. Okay, let's see. Okay. Okay, let's see. Is that working for everyone? It should force you to make a copy. Mm. Okay, if you'll click the link again, I think it's working. It says the access has been updated 3 times, so hopefully, hopefully that means it's working. Okay, awesome. So I'll give you just a second to catch up for those 2 questions I had. Okay, and before we go any further, any questions or thoughts, you can add those in the chat. Okay, so another really important part of the science of reading is that we're placing the text at the center. So, what I mean by that is that the text we are teaching, we are using that text and thinking about what does this text lend itself to? So maybe the text lends itself to ask questions or to make inferences, or maybe it's a really, if you're doing like a mystery, that would be a really good place to be asking questions and making inferences, those kind of things. If you're doing informational text, it may be a really good place to do a summary or get the gist. So really putting the text at the center. So this report is linked here if you're interested in reading it, but it really talks about that the reason that our scores have been stagnant on the NAEP test in the United States is this over-reliance on isolated comprehension strategies and assessments. So really we should be looking at a text-centered approach and looking at the text and deciding what vocabulary they will need, what word knowledge they will read, and what kind of comprehension strategy the text lends itself to. So, really placing the text at the center to make sure that we're thinking about instead of trying to find a standard and then make it fit in our text, we're looking at the text first and trying to decide how we could best teach that text with what strategies we would use in the standards. Okay, so one thing that I would do, this is an application piece. I'm going to give you a lot of ideas of how to use AI to do these things. But first, I would look at my curriculum. So by curriculum, any textbooks you were using, any stories you were using. So look at that first and see, is it giving you these things already? So if it's already identifying word patterns and morphologies in a short story, helping you teach those word parts, then you probably don't need to use AI to do that, right? You already have those in your curriculum. It may suggest tier 2 and 3 vocabulary. There might be background knowledge activities. It may suggest a fluency passage that you could reread with your students to help them make sense of the text. And it may also suggest a comprehension strategy. So if I were doing this in the classroom, the first thing I would do was look to see if I was following this roadmap. So is this roadmap in my text that I'm using? And if not, that's where I can use AI to enhance what I am using. Okay, so for this activity, I used Notebook LM, but I also played a little bit today. This was available in ChatGPT. It worked with Magic School AI. It worked with Gemini. So my guess is you can use whatever AI tool you are comfortable with in order to do this. As long as you're able to upload a short story or upload the text you're using, then you should be able to do this. So I'm going to kind of ask you to do this with me as we're going. So I'm going to pause here and ask that you open whatever AI tool you like using best. So I use Notebook LM most of the time, so that's why that's the one I chose. So you choose your tool, choose your AI tool. And then I'm going to ask you to find a short story. So this can be any short story. We're just kind of playing with this today. And if you want to use the same ones I did, you can click the Notebook LM link. And then I think here that I have an Edgar Allan Poe story, The Telltale Heart is what, um, when I developed this presentation, that's what the high school I was in the day before was using. So that's why I put that story in there. So you can steal mine if you'd like. And when you write a prompt, you're going to use the context, so what course you're teaching, and the output. So what do you want it to do? What will the students do with it? Maybe how it fits the standard. Um, and so this first time, we're going to think about word parts. So I'm going to ask Notebook LM to identify the word patterns and morphology in this short story. So here was my need. I needed some help finding some word parts and word patterns in this short story. So here was my prompt. For my 11th grade English language arts class, identify word patterns and morphology in the short story and suggest ways students can apply these patterns and morphemes when writing about the story. So I'm going to pause here and let you craft a prompt of some sort. So Notebook LM gave me these answers. So it talked about the suffix ly, and it talked about how the narrator frequently used these words. And it talked about how students might write, how this ly adverb at the end, using this ly suffix, helped the narrator be meticulous and calculated, right? So we could talk about that. So the suffix er and more that the narrator uses throughout, the author uses throughout. And in this student application, they talk about when writing about the story's climax, students can use comparative structures to track the rising action. So they could also, right, kind of copy what the author was doing. Um, so the word patterns and repetition used throughout. So they could incorporate repetition in something they were writing to do a theme. And then they also talk a lot about here the negative prefixes. And they say a writing strategy here could be a style mimicry exercise. So thinking about using all these word patterns or word parts like Poe did, and to create meaning through using those word parts. So knowing that we're supposed to teach morphology and break down words, it's really important for me to point out how we are using the ly and what it means and how it changes the tone of the author's story, or how it's changing the morphology of the story. So I'm going to ask you to do a prompt, something similar to this. I'm going to put this back up here and I'm going to give you some time. I'd like one or two of you to maybe share in the chat what did you get when you asked for word patterns or morphology in the text you inputted? Any good ideas from your AI tool? Okay, thank you. So House on Mango Street shared the prefixes and suffix hunts. That's a great idea for the prefix un and down. That's great. Okay, we will move on, but please feel free if you get something to drop it in the chat. We'd love to see what you get. So the next thought is generating background knowledge and activities for comprehension. So this was a big one for me, especially when I was teaching English learners, is just trying to anticipate what might my students not know, right? So what might be in this story that they may not know that I need to pre-teach or let them know what we're talking about. So here was my prompt again for my 11th grade English language arts class. Identify the background knowledge I will need to teach for students to understand this story. And here were the results I got. Um, so the concept of the unreliable narrator. So the narrator who's not exactly being truthful, right? And knowing that some of his things are not exactly the things that he's saying are not exactly true. This is one that I don't think I ever would have thought of had I not put this in. The superstition of the evil eye, and explaining to students what he actually means by this evil eye and why he thought this man was such a threat to him in the story. Um, Explaining the Gothic genre, so the Gothic literary elements that students may need to know in order to appreciate how they're used. So thinking about the setting, black, midnight, the heightened senses, a lot of death and decay in this story. And then also, the narrator has a lot of guilt for what he has done. And how that manifests through he slowly kind of is descending into madness here. So, kind of thinking about how anxiety can manifest physically and cause him to be physically sick. And then the legal and social context. So the police show up at his door and kind of thinking about what that would mean for him. So providing all this background as we're reading through the story or before we're reading through the story could really help students grasp the meaning of what's happening here. So again, I'm going to ask you to try. So ask AI to generate some background knowledge for the short story, what you might need for students, and share that in the chat. Okay, understanding the urban settings, economic concepts, foreshadowing, those are great things to think about before teaching. Okay. Um, this is a big one, finding tier two and tier three vocabulary words. So thinking about what words are in this story that my students may not know that I may need to go over, and kind of remembering that, right, if a student can't read a word, they can't understand the text. So making sure that we know what those words are, and getting our students to think about those words. So here was my prompt for this one. So I said for my 11th grade English language arts class, what tier two and three vocabulary words are in the passage? And maybe what are some activities students could do to learn these words? So I added a little bit there to what are some good vocabulary activities for me to do? Um, so here's some tier two words they have and some tier three words. I did notice that some of the tier three words were very similar to the background knowledge. So probably very important for me to teach those, right? If I'm getting the same things over and over when I'm looking at what to teach. And they mentioned semantic mapping. So semantic mapping is an evidence-based vocabulary activity. So I would probably definitely do that. And it also talks about drawing on the morphology. So, hey, we've already talked to you about these morphology words, so make sure you're looking right at those as we define these and what they mean. I really liked the idea of symbolism sketches. So, especially our artistic students, they could draw some of these vulture eyes or evil eyes. And then asking the students to change on the unreliable narrator to change what he's actually saying. So to rewrite what he's saying to make it what he's actually doing, what his words mean literally. All these are great ideas. And I thought, this would be if I was thinking about a choice board for vocabulary, this would be a great way to come up with a choice board is asking AI to give me some of suggested vocabulary activities for these higher level words. Okay, I'm going to ask you to try and share your results in the chat, please. Since we're kind of short on time here, I will go ahead and look at the other ones I did, and then we'll add some time at the end for you to share. So this one, I'm thinking about determining fluency passages to reread in the text. So maybe a piece of my text that students might have trouble reading, where could I have them reread and teach them the strategy of slowing down and thinking about it? So here, my prompt was give me three passages that students could reread to identify specific details and vocabulary they need to decode and define. And so it gave me these three passages. So the first passage it gave me is in the opening passages, focusing on how the narrator attempts to redefine his illness. So again, that unreliable narrator that we've talked about several times in talking about it as an illness. The metaphor of the evil eye again. So this is this passage here talking about what does this actually mean, this I, then why is he so scared of it? And then the third one would be the psychological breakdown. So showing where his anxiety is really getting to him. And even though he's using these ER words and LY words, what is he actually doing with those? So being able to analyze that for the climax and the narrator's loss of composure as his anxiety gets to be too much. And also suggests, I didn't even ask it this time, but probably because I had asked it before, a two-column note-taking system to get students to think about these passages and to really dig deeply into them and have to reread them a couple times. So just really focusing on what could we do. I know several of the high-quality curricular materials already come with fluency passages, but if you're having to teach a short story, this would be a great way to just ask AI to help me figure out what would be good to reread and think about. And then a comprehension strategy. So I did want to say I uploaded this document. So this document is the 7 strategies of highly effective readers. So these came from the National Reading Panel. These activating, which is background knowledge, making inferences, monitoring and clarifying. So those metacognitive strategies where we slow down and kind of clarify any mix-ups we have as we're reading, questioning, asking. So students are doing self-questioning, they're generating questions and they're answering their questions, and then doing some searching and selecting, summarizing, and visualizing or organizing. So we can do that with a graphic organizer or constructing meaning, or one of earlier it said to have them draw some of the vocabulary words that could be visualizing as well. So I uploaded this document as well when I ask it to determine a comprehension strategy to use. So I wanted my AI tool to have all the necessary components. So I wanted to use one of those 7 evidence-based strategies here. And so I said, what would be the best comprehension strategy to use with this text? And it said inferring. So, of course, it's a mystery. We're trying to figure out what's going on. So, inferring would be a great one. It also talked about monitoring and clarifying. So, how do we fix when the narrator is not being exactly straightforward and we have to read between the lines? How can we monitor and clarify what's happening there? And then a complementary strategy was visualizing or organizing. So, again, it's talking about creating drawings of what we're seeing as we're going through the text. Oh, okay. And so in your note catcher, let's see if I can go back. I will ask you in your note catcher to let's see. There we go. Reflect on which instructional practices or strategies you could use to make reading instruction more effective for your students. So which one of these things may you use with AI, pair with AI, to enhance your reading instruction for students? So I'll pause here and just let you think about what you might do. If you'd like to drop it in the chat, go ahead. Maybe it's vocabulary or fluency, a comprehension strategy. What would you like to do? Okay, and then just some reminders here about giving context for the prompt. So providing the necessary background information when you're prompting. So this could include details about your project or your students, your target audience, a specific situation. So in this one, I just used English 11 in my examples. I just said in my English 11 class, but I could even get very specific into, my student who is a English learner with what the first language is, what they're having trouble with. You can get very, very you can get down in down in the weeds in that context. So make sure that you narrow it down as much as you need to, especially if you are differentiating for other students. Um, and so, yes, I agree. Asking AI to get those vocabulary words that you aren't aware of, that I agree with that. It is so important. Because sometimes you don't realize what they don't know. So thank you, Viola, for adding that in the chat. Those vocabulary words are so important. And it goes with what I was talking about on the context. So I was working in an area where there were no trailer parks, and we were reading Because of Winn-Dixie. And my students thought a trailer park was a campground. When I said, guys, what's a trailer park? We were about halfway through the story. They thought that meant it was a campground. And I realized, gosh, maybe if I had, right, done a little bit more background building, they would have known that. So that vocabulary word of the setting would have been really important for me to think about students not knowing. So even giving that context of where you're at, right? Like where you're teaching, what students you're teaching. Maybe even I saw some of you were using CKLA, so maybe putting in, what your unit's about and how you want to connect all of these things together would also be really important. And then an output indicator. So what's the desired format and structure? So like maybe list the top 3 ideas or write a 100-word intro paragraph. What do you want students to do with this? Maybe you want to provide an answer in a table. That's also really important. And so then also set limitations to guide AI. That's also an important part when you're prompting as well.